I'm Max Keise. This is On the Edge. Time now to go to Sweden and talk with the founder of the Swedish Pirate Party, Rick Falkvinge. Welcome to On the Edge.
Thanks, Max. It's great to be on the show.
All right, Rick, I want to talk about the Swedish Pirate Party, but first I want to talk about Bitcoins, which has gotten a lot of attention recently, and we've talked about it and others. First of all, you yourself recently said that you've poured all of your savings into Bitcoin. So tell the audience, what are Bitcoins and why have you put your savings into them?
Well, you know, Max, Bitcoin is kind of a novel concept, but imagine, if you will, what email did to the postal service. Bitcoin stands to do the exact same to the global banking system. It moves our money, our usable and transferable money, if you like, from a centralized system to our computers where we can do with it what we like. If you want one example, I recently transferred the value of about a cup of coffee to a friend in New Zealand. I did this on a Sunday, and he had the money a couple of minutes later, just like with email. If this were to go through the banking system, I mean, they would sit on it for days. I would not be able to do this on a Sunday. There would be outrageous fees that would go far beyond the cup of coffee, not to mention the fact that they would be aware of it, which, no, they are not. And this, that they're not aware of it, takes this thing to a whole new level. It means that your money cannot be frozen. They cannot be taken away from you, and transactions cannot be stopped, and nobody even knows about the transaction having taken place at all. I mean, take a look at what's the entire system right now for paying at a distance. We have Visa, we have MasterCard, that essentially sit on the entire trust of making payments on a distance. With Bitcoin, all of that disappears. You don't have to trust anybody. And, more importantly, Visa and MasterCard don't get a cut. They're taking 3 to 5% of every transaction as is. And there's quite a strong business case for cutting them out right there.
Okay, now you mentioned Visa and MasterCard. The news came out this past week that the government has reversed itself. They were going to limit the amount of fees that these credit card companies charge per transaction. They've since reversed themselves. They've allowed the credit cards now to increase the cap that they're charging on transactions. Number one, the credit cards are reaping money off the top. Number two, the stocks in these companies jumped 10, 20% in a day, and the big beneficiaries of this were the hedge fund operators who were long the stocks, and of course they trade primarily on inside information, and they're removing capital from the public domain. So Bitcoins would eliminate all of that abuse of the system, number one, and talk a little bit about the fact that the predominant theme here with a Bitcoin is encryption.
Right, exactly right. If you have a normal or legacy or standard currency, like the US dollar or the euro or the Japanese yen or whatever, then you trust the government to not start the printing presses and just devalue your currency to nothing. But we all know from history that this has happened on a number of occasions, and frankly, neither the euro nor the US dollar is looking fairly secure at this moment. In contrast, with Bitcoin, you don't trust the government. You trust mathematics. The entire premise rests on mathematical formulas and agreements that are based on encryption. What Bitcoin is essentially a number of cryptographic keys that are stored on your computer, and therefore, as long as you have what's called the private key for a certain amount of money, the system will recognize that the system will have the public key for the equivalent, and these public and private keys fit together. Therefore, anybody will recognize the amount of money you're presenting to them as long as you have the private key. What this also means is that since the supply of Bitcoin is fixed, nobody can print Bitcoin. Nobody can run on a rampage saying, hey guys, let's turn on the printing presses, government needs more money. Well, that has happened, hasn't it? But that's not going to happen with Bitcoin, since the supply is fixed. Us who use Bitcoin don't trust the government. We trust a mathematical agreement between us who use it. And that's a world of difference in terms of security against, well, like a bank bailout, which might have happened recently.
Okay, you've got a few themes going there, Rick. Let's try to break it down a little bit. First of all, the currency, it's broken down into what are called the cryptographic keys. Number two, the currency is a means of exchange, number one, but it can be a means of an investment wherein one is realizing a gain. For example, or to compare it to the recent action in the Swiss franc. People buy and sell Swiss francs to use as their day-to-day currency. It also happens that the Swiss franc against the euro and other currencies has gone up recently because it has properties that people value over other mediums of exchange and other currencies. But putting aside for a second the fact that the value of these Bitcoins themselves are moving up in value, the fact that it is a medium of exchange encrypted that is outside of government control, it sounds like gold and silver in a lot of ways, but the people in the gold and silver crowd don't like Bitcoin. What are they missing?
Now, what sets this apart from gold and silver are primarily three things. Bitcoin is divisible, it is remote, or it can be traded without a distance, and it's portable. If you're looking at, first, it's divisible to 8-digit places, or 8 decimal places. If you were to stand in the supermarket line, and you would pick up a gold bullion or something like that, you would not be able to start carving off of this gold bullion in the supermarket and come to a correct weight. With Bitcoin, that's not a problem. Second, you can trade at a distance. Like I said, I sent money to my friend in New Zealand, here from Northern Europe, and it took a matter of minutes for him to get the money. That's a drop-in replacement for the banking system if I ever knew one. And last but not least, it's portable. If you're comparing to the gold and silver crowd, yeah, sure, you can have gold in your vault, but if you're going to trade with it, you don't really want to carry gold bullion around, do you? I mean, seriously. You sure could, but it wouldn't be my favorite means of exchange. In comparison with Bitcoin, you can carry, this is a file containing cryptographic keys, containing your private keys to your money. You can carry that on a thumb drive, you can carry that in your laptop, you could even carry it on the digital memory on your camera. And since it's a file containing your private keys, you can even have it in several copies without several copies giving you twice the money. Just because you copy the cryptographic keys, you don't get twice the money, but you have the keys in more places. Now, that also brings us to a different problem that you need to protect against data leakage, but it tells you that you can have the same value stored securely at home and in a thumb drive in your pocket. Let me see somebody do that with a gold bullion. Have the same kind of gold bullion in their pocket as they have at home.
Now, let me ask you this to get kind of philosophical on this, because you are involved in political dimensions, and you're involved, of course, with the Swedish Pirate Party. You're the founder of the Swedish Pirate Party, and you're quite active in politics. Now, if in fact we've seen, and you made the comparison to WikiLeaks, and you made the comparison to P2P file swapping and open source and how that relates to software in the entertainment industry. In the case of, let's say, open source software, like the Apache software that drives the backbone of the internet, it pushed out the old school, and it brought in the new school. Now, with Bitcoin, because there's a question here. Obviously, governments are going to hate it, but criminals are going to love it. So, but the question is, will the uptake in the white economy, that is to say, not the black criminal economy, be great enough to overcome the benefits to the black economy, and will it be sufficient to push out the current system, which we know is you could almost put the entire current system in the black economy. You know, Ben Bernanke and the central bankers are really criminals, aren't they? Because they counterfeit worthless fiat paper, and they are driving these economies into extinction. Okay. But is that the idea, that the good will drive out the bad?
Yeah, I agree perfectly with that comparison. Like I started out saying that Bitcoin is doing to the banking system what email did to the postal service. I mean, we've been looking at how new systems like Apache are replacing the proprietary walled garden systems pretty much all over the world across every sector. As soon as a company wants this walled garden where they aim to provide everything their customers will need, but actively prevent them from going outside of their own corporate domain, we see this particularly with banks. History tells us that whenever openness comes around, those walled gardens just fall. They go bankrupt. People don't want to be locked in. In fact, they hate it. So if you're looking at how Bitcoin changes this game, it turns out that bankers and banks have been pretending what they do is magic for the past 40 or 30 years. And so they've been charging us an arm and a leg to hold a number in a database. And that's just ridiculous when you think about it. So if you're looking at how Bitcoin eases and it just simplifies your handling your own money tremendously. Imagine if you had your equivalent of your email and there was your money. You could receive it just like email. You could send it just like email. You could sort it just like email. You could see statistics just like email. That's what Bitcoin is. That's how I so easily could send money to my friend in New Zealand. And that's why bankers will try to have this outlawed for whatever reason they can come up with. The use case and the business case are both so compelling. This will disintegrate this lie that bankers have pushed on us, that only they can handle these bits. If money is information, then it turns out that peer-to-peer distribution and open source thinking. It first came to music and media and disrupted that. Then it came to news reporting and sources and leakage and disrupted that. And it's about to disrupt the banking sector big time.
All right, now let's move on and talk a little bit about another dimension to Bitcoins here. We talked about its use as a medium of exchange. It's got cryptology. It's portable. It's safe. Now, as we mentioned, it does appreciate in value, and the way that this is accomplished is because the total number of coins in circulation is limited per an algorithm, which I'm not going to repeat because I can't. It's not, I don't remember it, but it is somewhat complex. And then you have an appreciation kicking in because of supply and demand. There's huge demand, there's limited supply, the value is going up. But some people immediately jump to the conclusion, that this is a Ponzi scheme, even though, to me, others would argue that it's simply the reflection of supply and demand. But how do you address the Ponzi scheme question?
Right. I've heard people ask that same question, as in, well, people are buying cheap and they're selling more expensive later to newcomers, so there must be something fishy with this, and they call it a Ponzi scheme. However, a Ponzi scheme is where a central person is feeding off old investors by the newcomers into the system. There's no transparency in a Ponzi scheme, and the key is that there's this scammer who's pretending that there isn't a real supply and demand, and the money is actually stashed away somewhere when it isn't. That's the defining of a Ponzi scheme. There's nothing like that in Bitcoin wherever. Rather, it's a fixed supply of cryptographic keys that people put more and more value on as they become more and more used. Imagine, if you will, a stock in a company. It's pretty much like that. Early newcomers to stock in a successful company will get the stock cheap, and as this company becomes successful, the value of that stock will rise, and sure, it'll be that the early comers will sell some of it off to newcomers, and you could say the exact same thing, that people are just buying stock or Bitcoin or gold or whatever in pure speculation, hoping to sell it more expensively later. That does not make it a Ponzi scheme. That makes it subject to laws, very real laws of supply and demand. If demand rises after you made your purchase, then you'll be able to sell the commodity you bought at a higher price later. There's nothing criminal about that. That's the way market forces work.
Okay, so just to be clear, under a Ponzi scheme scenario where new money is used to pay out old money, this is not present in the Bitcoin scheme. So by definition, it does not qualify as a Ponzi scheme. What about the flash crash of the Bitcoin exchange recently, the exchange of Bitcoin? What happened? Does it concern you about the security of these systems?
Well, it's certainly a problem that the largest exchange of Bitcoin, it crashed and closed for, I think, over a week even, or at least in the ballpark of a week. What surprised me, though, and surprised me a lot, was that Bitcoin didn't just plummet in value afterwards. Rather, it stayed at the approximate same levels when the Mt. Gox exchange closed. It was at 17.5. It's now trading at about 14. But you need to remember that this was an exchange crashing. It was not the currency. And we're seeing that the trust in Bitcoin remains unchanged. We see that in its value being still stable. And that tells me that the fundamentals of this currency are much, much stronger than I have ever imagined. I mean, it's still not a mature market. Bitcoin is still being built. The services are still a bit ragtag. They're built by, well, let's face it, nerds. And they are maturing, they are professionalizing, but they're nowhere there yet. So while I expect Bitcoin to appreciate another, 3 magnitudes or so in value, if it becomes successful and if or when services become professional looking, we're nowhere there yet. And that's also why I went all into Bitcoin at this stage, as I realized that the business case and the use case for this technology is absolutely compelling.
Speaking of walled gardens and digital currencies, the news is out now that Facebook credits is a big part of Facebook's business model going forward. They are effectively saying that all content that's being developed on their virtual platforms like Farmville and all the currencies that they use, like Zynga's virtual currencies, have to go through the Facebook experience, and that they are creating a parallel currency that is, again, an attempt to disrupt the exchange of currency in a free, anonymous way by creating, obviously, a highly structured corporate walled garden currency. Have you looked at the Facebook credits? Are you following that? What are your thoughts?
Facebook credits, well, it's an interesting concept, but I tend to see it as vouchers and not cash itself. True, you might cash it out, and that way it's a bit like playing chips at a casino or something like that. But I believe Facebook created this for two reasons. First of all, it's a legal circumvention device against gambling laws, meaning that if you can't play for cash, if you're playing for vouchers, then maybe you're not running afoul of United States law. Second, it's just like you say, it's a walled garden. It's creating more services within their own walled garden at Facebook, and so it's an attempt at creating a new kind of capture, not just for people's attention, but also for their economy. We'll see how that goes. I mean, sure, Zynga is making a lot of successful games, and gambling has always been popular, but Facebook, well, it certainly has the attention of the day, but the people are not really happy with it, and in particular, they're not happy with the way Facebook has been treating their customer. So, as in transferring your money to Facebook, well, I don't think that's something I would do, really. I might certainly buy a bit of in-game credit for it, but as an economy, as a currency, no. I would be very uncomfortable with that.
All right. Well, that's all the time for we have this episode of On the Edge. Rick Falkvinge from Sweden, the Swedish Pirate Party. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Max.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of On the Edge with me, Max Keise, and I want to thank my guest, Rick Falkvinge from the Swedish Pirate Party. If you want to send me an email, please do so, ontheedge@presstv.com. Until next time, this is Max Keise saying bye, y'all.